In 1976, presumably to mark the 200-year anniversary of independence, a local boxer by the name of Robert R. Balboa ran these hallowed steps. There's a documentary and everything. Anyway, I'm told that when you visit Philadelphia, it's customary to replicate that very run. So I'm going to do it here today.
Hello, I'm Laurence Brown, America's finest British import, according to the Quincy Gazette. As an impressionable child, I firmly believed that my English hometown of Grimsby was the rugged centre of the universe. Not even the smell of battered fish could convince me otherwise. Then, at 12, my life changed forever. It was then that I borrowed this book from my school's library, America, an Aerial View. Overnight, my obsession grew with a country 3,000 miles to the left. No page went unturned as I ingested colourful, expansive images of the 50 states, a memo that outlined the bits the movies left out. And eventually, I moved to that country, and page by page I've made that book my reality, just like the late fees. Here's my latest trek through the boundless landscape of the United States of America. With the exception of Delaware, I'd previously been to all states bordering Pennsylvania, but my only previous flirtation with the state itself had come during an alcohol-induced layover at Philly Airport. And layovers don't count, especially if you don't remember them. Anyway, I'm off the booze now, and something tells me that I won't forget Pennsylvania this time. As with most US trivia, my first major introduction to the city of Pittsburgh came through that well-known almanac of geographic enlightenment, pro wrestling. I was 16 and still living with my parents when I watched, awestruck, as The Undertaker hurled Mick Foley from the top of a steel cell at King of the Ring 98. At the time, it was among the most amazing things I'd ever seen, but I didn't make the connection that the dramatic setting for that steel cell was the Steel City. I'd heard that nickname bandied around whenever wrestling shows took place in Pittsburgh, and it connected with me on an English level too, because I grew up 70 miles from England's own Steel City, Sheffield. Both acquired the nickname back when steel manufacturing was their dominant industry, and as such, both even have a sports team called the Steelers. Our pit stop in Pittsburgh happened on the afternoon of the 4th of July, and my hope was that local fans of my channel would keep the Revolutionary War jokes to a minimum, and to their credit they did, largely because nobody knew who I was. Next to us, the confluence of the Allegheny and Monongahela rivers marked the starting point of a river that I knew well, the Ohio. This inviting three-way intersection, we were told, would play host to the evening's fireworks. And as we sought out a decent spot from which to watch them, I turned my camera toward the city. At first glance, Pittsburgh appeared to live up to one of its other nicknames, the City of Bridges. With 446, it boasts marginally more than Venice and 20 times the amount seen in the film 21 Bridges, probably. It's all part of Pittsburgh's celebrated transportation infrastructure, which also includes the Duquesne Incline. This funicular was once used for transporting cargo up the 30-degree facade of Mount Washington. Today, after narrowly avoiding closure in the 60s, it transports people, but for us that would have to wait until the morning. After all, the phrase, "what goes up must come down," also applies to America's birthday celebrations. One crucial benefit of celebrating Independence Day sober is that I got to enjoy my enduring fear of heights without a hangover, so everyone's a winner. From atop the Duquesne Incline, the full scope of Pittsburghian bridges comes into view. If yins ever make it out this way, this view would be best during the early evening, when the sun travels 92 million miles just to shimmer against the Pittsburgh skyline. Yins, by the way, is a Western Pennsylvania word for you people. Something I discovered on this trek is that Pennsylvania has such a rich and weird vocabulary that it almost certainly warrants its own reverend video, so stay tuned. 480 million years ago, a vast mountain range formed in what is today the North American continent. May we never forget the brave trilobites who perished. Today, the range is known as the Appalachian Mountains, or Appalachian if you're one of those people. And in many ways, it was a revelation that the Appalachian Mountains covered so much of Pennsylvania, largely because this wasn't particularly well captured in America, an aerial view. As the hills rolled by and the sound of fireworks still echoed in my brain, I took a moment to consider my own independence. Here I was on America's open road, living that boyhood dream, and the only boss that I had to answer to was myself, and occasionally my wife. I was going to mention you, and it was with that same sense of independence right here in Pennsylvania that another self-made millionaire, not to suggest that I am one, made a fortune in the chocolate business.
So we're here in Hershey, Pennsylvania, of course the home of Hershey's chocolate. The only problem is it's about 100 degrees Fahrenheit here today, so all of the chocolate has melted. Mind you, when I think about it, melted Hershey's chocolate is nothing new in my life because I have a sofa and a bad memory.
As an Englishman, I'm supposed to despise Hershey's chocolate, but the uncomfortable truth of the matter is I don't despise any chocolate. And it's far easier, I've found, to appreciate something when you know its origin story. The unincorporated community of Hershey, Pennsylvania was formed in the early 1900s, when its founder, Milton Snavely Hershey, a wealthy business owner who was born in the area, purchased the land in order to house the up-and-coming Hershey Chocolate Company. In addition to providing housing and affordable living for his workers, Hershey would add to the town a free school, a leisure park, golf courses, a community center, a hotel, a zoo, and the Hershey Gardens, the latter in honor of his late wife, Catherine. It was Hershey's intention to create a nice garden of roses, unfortunately not in reference to the Cadbury product of the same name. Overlooking the town, the gardens have now expanded to include other elements such as a children's garden, which is adorned with ornaments invoking Hershey products, and a butterfly house with real butterflies and not chocolate ones.
And Hershey, Pennsylvania is sort of like what would happen if you gave Willy Wonka a blank check, because you have this, the Hershey Garden, you have the Hershey Museum, and you have the Hershey roller coaster park.
Given our tight schedule, the oppressive heat, and my complicated relationship with heights, we sidestepped Hershey Park in favor of the Hershey Story Museum. This place really furthered my insight into the life of Milton Hershey, who it turns out had two surprising connections to my homeland. Firstly, while heading up the Lancaster Caramel Company in the late 1800s, Milton Hershey pocketed a massive windfall when an English buyer ordered a huge delivery of his product. This allowed Hershey to pay off his debts and invest in better equipment and ingredients. Secondly, in 1912, Milton and Catherine embarked on one of many business trips to Europe. They were due to travel back to the United States on a British passenger liner, but had to cancel at the last minute due to other business matters. The name of that passenger liner? RMS Titanic. The Hersheys narrowly avoided being lost in the pond. True story. 50 miles from Hershey lies a pivotal place in American folklore, the borough of Gettysburg. During a bus tour around the historic site, the size and scope of the area thoroughly challenged my perception that the Battle of Gettysburg basically took place in a field. In fact, there were several. The Civil War battle was fought between the Union and the Confederacy from July the 1st to July the 3rd, 1863. By the 4th of July, America's Independence Day, the summer air sweltered around the carnage. With around 50,000 casualties, it remains the costliest battle in US history. So I was stunned to learn from our tour guide that among the thousands who perished, only one was a civilian. Mary Virginia Jenny Wade was fatally wounded while kneading dough. Famously, President Lincoln would deliver the Gettysburg Address later that year, and one of my favorite little-known facts from American history is that Abe's appearance in Gettysburg that day was documented in a photograph.
As you can see, I'm having a terrible time in Philadelphia. England have just made it to the final of the Euros, and this is the view from my hotel.
During my 13 years in the US, I seem to have encountered a lot of bells. Christmas bells, church bells, alarm bells. And prior to my visit to Philadelphia, I'd also encountered an oddly high number of Liberty bells. But in July, I finally got to see the real thing. Now granted, the idea of navigating tight security just to see a slightly damaged symbol of America's independence from the British might not sound like every Brit's cup of tea, but I had an obscurely sentimental reason for doing so. You see, in the irony to end all ironies, the Liberty Bell was cast not in Philadelphia, but London, specifically at the Whitechapel Bell Foundry. Now, in case you didn't know, Whitechapel was also the setting of my last English address before moving to America. In fact, I lived half a mile from where both Big Ben and the Liberty Bell were made.
Behind me is the Pennsylvania State House, or as it's known more commonly, Independence Hall. And it was in that precise building that a very important document was signed, the Declaration of Independence. Ultimately, of course, this would signal America's freedom from the greatest tyrannical regime of all time. I've decided to join some other Homo sapiens to take a closer look.
In a rare act of wanton betrayal, I was also quite moved to be standing in the very building where Jefferson, Hamilton, and the rest put the pen in not just Pennsylvania, but independence. That said, I was a bit surprised to discover that the Declaration likely wasn't signed on the 4th of July, 1776, but possibly as late as August. We've all procrastinated. But I was equally surprised to discover that there were only two main rooms available to the public: the Assembly Room and the Supreme Court Room. Later, I told the park ranger that I wanted to be in the room where it happened, and he rightly looked puzzled. Anyway, just as in Pittsburgh, my anonymity meant that I was able to avoid zingers like, "Did you hear the one about the tea room in Boston Harbor called Leave Now?" Guys, it's not 1773, let it go. Anyway, the point is, I definitely wasn't going to get recognized in Philadelphia, right? Wrong, but even when I did, I like to think I played it cool. Nice to meet you, Tom and family. Having now lived in Chicago for 5 years, I've finally come to terms with the fact that the largest cities often aren't the state's capital. But just like its Pennsylvanian comrades York and Lancaster, Philadelphia was once the nation's capital. Actually, just like both of those cities, Philadelphia's early history is also deeply rooted in its Englishness. In 1682, the city was planned and developed by the English Quaker William Penn, who also founded the entire Pennsylvania colony and for whose father the state was named. He decided to make Philadelphia one of the first American cities to operate on a grid system, for the very reason that he frowned upon the disorderly layout of his home city of London. I suppose I owe him a debt of gratitude, because even despite the 100-degree temperatures, Philadelphia was easily one of the most navigable cities I've had the pleasure of traversing on foot. One of the most striking things about the city is its mixture of old and new. While Philadelphia has spent the last 3 decades constructing the state's 4 tallest buildings, it still has plenty of old-world charm. This includes things like Elfreth's Alley, reportedly the oldest residential street in the US, and the home of Betsy Ross, the so-called maker of America's first flag. I say so-called because despite how much I wish it were true, there's actually surprisingly little evidence that it was. But her house was very charming, and if her courtyard is anything to go by, she certainly had a thing for cats. Actually, there's no historical record for that either. Did America just invent Betsy Ross? Clearly not, but something that I once believed without evidence was that Philadelphia was named after the cream cheese of the same name. It turns out that that product was founded in New York. But that's not to say that Philadelphians don't have their own special use for cheese. Far from it, in fact.
Alright, I spoke about this a few weeks ago on my channel. This is loaded with Cheese Whiz, and I'm about to put it in my mouth. Alright, let's try it. Oh, that is really good. That is really good. No, I take it all back. Cheese Whiz is my new hero.
Sandwich?
It's possible. No, I think it's definite that this has now superseded Arby's as the greatest beef sandwich I've had since moving to the US. And I'm not being bribed to say that either. In 1976, presumably to mark the 200-year anniversary of independence, a local boxer by the name of Robert R. Balboa ran these hallowed steps. There's a documentary and everything. Anyway, I'm told that when you visit Philadelphia, it's customary to replicate that very run. So I'm going to do it here today.
At this late stage, allow me to point out the non-work related reason we visited Pennsylvania in the first place. We were already visiting friends in nearby Maryland and figured we could just combine it with exploits in PA. So after saying farewell to our friends, we briefly visited two other places. Firstly, while accidentally driving through Delaware, we stopped off for 5 minutes in Wilmington. This allowed us to stretch our legs, but also to check off my 25th state and complete the set on Pennsylvania's contiguous states. Secondly, the fact that Philadelphia doesn't serve as Pennsylvania's capital didn't stop us from making a quick visit to the city that did. After all, it remains among my life's stupid ambitions to personally photograph every Capitol building in America. And just like each of the mountains that dominated our drive through the state, the Capitol in Harrisburg is notable for its stunning green dome. After a quick round of crab cakes at the lovely restaurant
Home 231.
Home is where we headed next. And so, as I continue to turn the pages on that dusty old library book, I will constantly revisit the question, where will my independence take me next?